Good morning and welcome to our conversation this morning, Dancing on the Edge of Edgy Conversations. I'm Dianna Anderson. I'm the CEO of Cylient, and I'm really excited to be in this conversation with you. I think how we talk with each other right now is so really important. And so I want you to get the absolute most out of our conversation today. And it truly is going to be a conversation. So to that end, I hope that you will go ahead and get your chat box up so that you can see what people are talking about. As we go through this conversation, I'm going to invite you to think about your own edgy conversation. And I'm going to invite you to share your thoughts and ideas as we go along so that in true coaching fashion, we can learn with and from each other. Because I'm going to share my perspective on how to have these kinds of conversations. And I'd be interested in hearing yours as well. Thank you, by the way, to all of you who sent in questions. I actually have 4 pages of them. So I've done my best to try to integrate some of the thoughts and ideas that will help you with those questions into the content of our work today. And I'll also take some questions at the end of our conversation, and I'll hold some time. I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then we are going to have some dialogue. And we can take examples of things if you want to work through something specifically. So, and also, please feel free to turn your video on so that you can see each other. I would love to see you. I think this could be a great conversation for all of us to be in. So let's begin. So if we're going to talk about edgy conversations, let's talk about what actually makes a conversation edgy. Certainly there are lots of them happening right now. And for me, I define an edgy conversation as a conversation that pushes us to the very edge of what we believe to be true. It's the kind of conversation that forces us to kind of come face to face with our own perspective or worldview, and often see where that connects with the people around us. And that's where emotions can run high. We often know we're at the edge of a conversation when we might feel our own emotions rise or watch the emotions of others begin to rise. And that, I think, is when we are really in the most productive kinds of conversations. I know it can feel uncomfortable, but here's why I think it's so important right now that we get more comfortable out here on the edge, which is we are in an amazing moment in time when so many of the structures that really hold our shared worldview about everything, what it means to be human, what it means to be good, what our goal here in life is. All of these things are sort of being challenged by what's going on in the world around us. And because these things are being challenged, we have the opportunity to engage in conversations, to change these underlying assumptions and beliefs and co-create a very different world. And so how we engage in these conversations is really, really important. Because if we don't do it well, we're going to miss this opening. We're going to miss the opportunity to make the kind of changes that are possible right now. And that's what's really brought home to me when I recently watched the documentary 13th, which if you haven't watched it, I would really highly recommend. And at the end of it, there's a really beautiful interview between Oprah and the filmmaker, Ava DuVernay. And one of the things that she said that really rocked me a little bit was she said, we've had these openings to talk about racial inequality more than once. But every time we've engaged the conversation, mostly what we have done is updated the system to work in the new current times. And that just really struck me that we don't want to do that again, nor do we want to not, miss this opportunity to engage other conversations. So it's really, really important that we give thought not only to what we're talking about, but how we're actually engaging in these conversations so that we can really move our worldview in a more productive way. My personal hope is that we are going to move away from so many of these fear-based, limiting assumptions and beliefs that we have about how the world works, and really begin to embrace a much more compassionate, I would say even love-based worldview that creates a much more equal and just world. I think that's the window that is available to us right now. And one, I'd like to help to give you tools to explore so that you can step into these conversations fully with whatever gift you have to bring to them. Because I believe that each of us has a voice and a gift to bring into the conversation. And it's really, really important to honor that. I had some people ask if I was going to address racism and inequality. And I will tell you, not specifically, I don't intend to make this conversation specifically about that conversation or many of the other conversations that are happening right now. But I would tell you I was inspired to do this dialogue because of my own experience talking with others about that issue. And I watched really good conversations get shut down when people came at them in a different way. And so what I wanted to do was just sit back and really invite people to look at what causes these conversations to shut down and what invites them to open up. So one of the first things I'd love for you to think about for a moment is just like, what are some of the edgy conversations that are happening in your world right now? Which ones are important to you? And I would invite you in the chat, what kinds of conversations are you finding a little bit edgy? So feel free to start idea generating there in the chat. Would love to see what people are thinking about. Budget cuts, yeah. Hour cuts, yeah. There's a lot going on. Why Black Lives Matter, yeah. Furloughs, burnout, white privilege, yeah. All of these very edgy, all of these pushing the edge on what's possible. Funding the police. So I'm reading some of the things from the chat. Concerns about job changes, possible layoffs. Yeah, managing kids, managing parents that are in nursing homes. All kinds of things happening here. I encourage you to check these out. So one of the things I think that we really need to ask ourselves first before we get into how to do this differently is, why isn't our current approach working? And here's what I would just say about that. Many of us view an edgy conversation as a battle to be won, or that there needs to be a decision made and an action taken. And I would say the thing to really think about is that many of these kinds of issues that we're dealing with are really multifaceted, in some cases even systemic. There's no easy answer to these things. They're much more like a tangle of things that has to be untied piece by piece in some cases than necessarily a decision that's going to be made and moved forward. And our old process of kind of taking our linear logical approach, putting out data and arguing about who's right and who's wrong tends to result in a lot of divisiveness. And often ends up polarizing people more than connecting them. So I want to talk about why we're talking about having these conversations as being like a dance. Because what I am proposing is that we approach them really differently. Now, my background is actually in dance. At one point, I actually studied to dance professionally. Not partner dance, which is what I want to talk about, but I have a good sense of what makes dance work. And I will tell you that the most beautiful dances are when two people come together, and with your partner, you must sense that person. All right, if you can't have a sense of where they're moving, if you don't have a sense of how to connect with them, you're going to step on each other. You're not going to be in sync. You're not going to find that space where the dance opens up and you both discover something new. That's what I think really good conversation looks like now. It's like, how can you dance and think about dancing with your conversation partner so that you're exploring how that person sees the world. You're getting an appreciation for how they view things from your perspective, but in a way that seeks to make connections, in a way that seeks to find possibilities that maybe you are not already seeing. That's what we want to approach. And so in order to really understand how to do this, the first thing I'd like for you to do is get a conversation in mind that is one that you want to have. Something that's edgy, all right? Something that you're not quite sure how to come at this, and something where you're going to have the opportunity to dance with the other person. And I'm going to walk you through a way of thinking about approaching these conversations. And, but I think you'll get more out of it if you actually have something in mind. So if you're open to it and would be willing to put into the chat what you're thinking about, what the conversation is that you want to have, go ahead and put it in there so that we can see the kinds of things that people have got in mind. So let's talk a little bit about how to approach conversations a little bit more like a dance, why it matters. The first thing that we've got to do is actually explore the other person's connection. All right, so rather than taking a seat in our own and kind of just figuring out how to defend it, drop our defenses. And the first thing is to start to explore the other person. How are they showing up? What's causing them to think the way that they are thinking? What is informing their choices? And then how are you going to maybe meet them where they are? So often we want to haul people into our world and have them meet us where we are. But I think when we dance, we have to have a middle ground. We've got to reach out and see if we can build a connection. The other thing that I would say is to choose your battles well. You know, when you're choosing which conversations you're going to engage in that are edgy, choose the ones that you think are going to make the most significant difference. Not necessarily the ones you can win or want to win, but I want you to really check what is your intention as you step into this conversation. If it's just to prove the other person wrong, you're probably going to end up in a battle. But if there's something you truly care about and you're looking for a way to move it forward, then your goal is really to create some connections in order to invite somebody to join you in that cause and moving something forward in a meaningful way. So what I'd like to talk about right now are the 3 C's for me of a creative conversation. Because for me, a conversation that moves the needle is actually a creative challenge. All right. And the creative challenge is, can you find a way to connect with this person and open up their thinking so that they'll embrace something new? So the 3 C's are care, concern, and connection. By the way, we are going to be sending you a handout. I think you knew that when you signed up, but we'll have this information in a handout so that you can use this going forward and perhaps ponder these ideas a little bit more as you engage in your own conversations. So the first piece is care. And the first thing that I'd like you to explore when you're in a conversation with someone that's feeling a little bit edgy is, what does that person truly care about? And here's why that's important, is that people change to attain the things that they care the most about. So if you don't understand why somebody cares about something, it's pretty hard for you to help them see how looking at something differently is going to help them to attain whatever that outcome might be. Even with these really complex issues, like racism or like equality, they don't matter for the same reason to everybody. And one of the things that always surprises me a little bit is that people believe that the reason that they care about something must be the same reason that everybody else cares about something. And that's actually not always the case. So you can explore what people care about by asking them things like, what's concerning you the most about this? Or what is it about this topic that really resonates for you? And then really, really listen to what's important to that person. The next thing that I would want you to do is actually start to think about concerns that the person is having. Because it's our fears or concerns that keep us from moving forward. All right, so if I am afraid that I'm going to lose something if things change, I'm probably going to find some way to defend the status quo. And if I am afraid that if the world changes in a way that I can't keep up with, or that's going to disadvantage me, I'm also going to argue in my own way for the status quo, or to keep to keep things as familiar as they can be. And so I think one of the things that we really want to be understanding as we move into a conversation is, what do people really feel is at stake for them in this conversation? Again, even with these really big conversations like, any kind of systemic change, people are going to feel that something is at stake, whether they feel it's going to make the world more unstable, whether they feel like they don't have the skills to compete in a new world. I want you to keep in mind as you listen to people, what are they most frightened of? It was really interesting to me. I was on an airplane a number of years ago and, just waiting to take off, but didn't have my buds in, was just listening to what was going on around me. And there was a conversation happening across from me about climate change. This is when the wildfires were just burning like crazy in California. And the person there was really expressing a point of view that he hoped that all of this damage that was being done was not going to escalate the climate change conversation. And I just listened to him. I didn't listen to what he was saying. I listened to what was happening underneath. I thought, where's that coming from? And as the conversation progressed, the real deep sense I got was this person was very confused about what climate change really was. He didn't understand what he could do about it. And he was scared that doing something about it was going to rock his world. And the best he could do was deny that it was happening. And that gave me a real compassion for him. Not that I would agree with the case, but it really changed how I would approach a conversation with this person. This is the kind of listening I'm encouraging you to do, right? Because people, by the way, will not always be able to tell you what is at stake for them. He couldn't have told me. That was maybe what was driving the choices that he was making. And I don't know for certain that that was true, but I'll tell you, that was the sense of it. And if I was in a conversation about climate change, I wouldn't have argued with him about why it was going to save the world. I would have inquired as to how he thought it might change his. This is really important, that we meet people where their fears are. All right. And that the next piece that we do is actually invite them to connect with something that's going to help them address whatever the limitation is that's keeping them from opening to whatever is important to them. Because your goal in these kinds of conversations is not to win. Okay. If you approach this thing and you think, I'm going to win or change, I wouldn't change that man's view on climate change. But there might have been some way in the conversation for me to help him find some place of empowerment where he could maybe make a step that would help him to feel a little bit more confident about moving into change. I mean, frankly, that's probably where I would have begun. So the next part of the exploration, once you've got some idea about how the person sees the world, and by the way, the thing you're most listening for when you're listening to what they care about is what are some of the assumptions or beliefs that are underlying that are driving their worldview. Then once you've got a sense of what they might be afraid or concerned about, the next thing I want you to think about is how do you build a connection, even if it's just a small one, that might help them to move forward in a meaningful way towards what you think is important or what you think is going to help them. And it could be, or even it could be even just helping them understand a different perspective, which would obviously be the perspective that you hold. So the ways that you can create connections with people are really helping them to shift that underlying assumption or belief if that's limitation, or to address the fear if that seems to be more limiting. Let's start with assumptions or belief. Let's say that they assume or believe that something else is true than what you believe. Ways that you can build connections are actually better done if they are visual or visceral. All right, visual as in I give you an image of something that's different. So you can do this with a story, or you could do this with a metaphor. Well, for example, I gave you the metaphor of dance today as a way of having a conversation because it was easier than me giving you, a bunch of steps. If you've got the idea that it's a dance, you have probably some experience with dance. And hopefully that metaphor helped you get in touch with the idea, a different feeling of how the conversation could go. And hopefully some of what I'm sharing with you is helping you to inhabit that new space in a new way. So hopefully you're kind of exploring what that is. That's what a metaphor or an analogy can do for us. It gives us a framework to help us inhabit a new idea. So would love to see for you to be using a little bit more metaphorical language in order to help people make connections. Another thing that you can do is actually use your experience to open up somebody else's. I know I use stories from my own life all the time to help people see new possibilities. I'm sure that you must have stories in your life where maybe you felt a certain way. I know there have been stories for me where I have felt disenfranchised or disrespected, or times when I wasn't taken seriously. I could share stories of what that felt like if that was useful in order to help somebody else experience something from a different way and maybe see a new possibility. So I hope that you'll consider using stories, analogies. The other thing that I find, particularly if we're in these really big conversations that are more systemic, I think that helping people or asking people to provide you with resources that would help you to understand their perspective, is a great way to educate yourself. And two, might also invite them to be more open to you offering them resources that could help them to connect with the perspective that you are sharing. So when we're talking about making connections, what I want your goal to be is to just play on the edge of where that person has stopped. Maybe even asking them questions like, what if something changed? Or what would you like to be different? Or what's the next step that would move you in that direction? Our goal, again, is not to win the argument or win the race. It's to build a new bridge that we can work with and use to help continue to expand that person's worldview. And I find that when we enter conversations with this perspective of dancing to find opportunities, that we're more likely to be invited back into the conversation to continue it, that we will learn things ourselves that will be valuable to us, and that we can find that place where we can make the greatest difference. Before I leave that, one thing I would just like to say, particularly for those of you who were more interested in some of these bigger, more systemic conversations. One of the things that I've been seeing a lot recently is what I think they're calling sort of cancel culture, which is where you see somebody do something and it doesn't align with your perspective, and you, I think, kind of call them out, which is shame or blame someone for doing something. I think that that approach is good in the beginning of a movement to create awareness and draw attention to just how egregious sometimes this behavior is and why it really matters. I would point out the Harvey Weinstein example for the Me Too movement, calling him out and really highlighting just the massive extent of this behavior and all that underlied keeping it in place was really important to get the movement underway. If you really, really want to make systemic change, though, you've got to abandon that as your primary approach to making a difference, because it takes the people that you most need to influence and drives them underground with fear. We need the people who are engaging in these behaviors to actually come out and feel safe enough to make change happen. And the kinds of conversations that I'm describing to you today, these creative conversations that build connections, make it safe for people who need to learn how to do things differently, to come out, to try, to risk, to be vulnerable. That's the space we've got to create. And if people are terrified that you are going to call them out if they say or do something that you perceive to be wrong, they will go back into hiding and we will miss this opportunity. So I'm really going to ask that you use the calling out piece carefully, thoughtfully, that you focus more on creating these spaces for connections, and that you notice that this is the long game. All right, the analogy that I've been kind of rolling around in my mind is sometimes when I see a lot of this calling out that's happening, again, okay in the beginning for awareness, but it's a little bit like brawling with deck chairs on the decks of the Titanic. Not going to change things. All right, for us to collectively make change of any kind, by the way, we've got to find the rudder. We've got to find the big assumptions or beliefs that are keeping our behaviors in place, and we've got to collectively push on them together. That means we can't be brawling with each other. We've got to choose our battles well. We must choose them and find the people that can push with us. They're not always the people that agree with us. We need a diversity of perspective to push on the rudder. Okay, we need a lot of different thinking. People with a lot of different skills to change the system, and we need to find ways to connect with them. And fostering our capability to do that is really, really important. So if you've got the person who's always been the naysayer and the limiter, and the person who's always just not with you, that's maybe not the place to start the battle. By the way, we do not need everyone pushing on the rudder. We need a tipping point. All right, it's arguable where it is. I've seen different evidence. I've seen as low as in the teens and as high as in up to 30%. Probably it's somewhere in the mid-20s. That's all we need. All right, we need some people clearly pushing on whatever it is, and things will change. So choose your battles well. And I would really invite you to cultivate your ability to be a better dance partner in any conversation that you are in. And so I'm going to give you a few ideas on how to do that, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So the first thing I want you to practice doing is using your presence to create a safe space for conversation. All right, I can tell when by the time I walk in and connect with you, whether it's going to be safe to dance with you or not. All right, and if you are coming in with your fists held high and you're ready for a fight,
I'm not going to accept to dance with you. You wouldn't come up to a dance partner and be rough. You want to look inviting. You want them to say yes. How do you cultivate a presence that people will say yes to, even if they see the world differently? This is a practice we all need to engage in. You also need to know that the calmest person will win. There was, I love this story. I heard it from Daniel Goldman at an emotional intelligence conference many years ago. He tells the story of, they actually did a science experiment where they brought someone who was really calm. It was actually, I think it was a monk, a Buddhist monk, and then someone who really could get riled up, and brought them together in conversation and actually like recorded, their sensory, I'm not using the word right, but kind of where they were at. And what they discovered was that even when the person who was really riled up got higher and higher and higher, as long as the monk never moved from his place of centeredness, the other person came and entrained to him. I have seen this over and over in my own coaching practice. I've had clients walk in and they are, set to go. And I just focus like crazy on staying centered. And by the end, they will always say, I feel so much calmer. Be the calm, all right? Don't give in, don't go with the emotion. Be the calm in the conversation, and you can keep the dance going. You've got to care for the conversation too, all right? Sometimes what we need to do is put bumpers around it. It's like, you know what? We're not going to make a decision and move into action today. Let's just understand each other. Let's just spend this first conversation exploring how you see it. Let me have a chance to share how I see it. Let's talk about what the next step will be. All right, we don't need home runs every time. Sometimes, particularly if the conversation is going to go on over time, it's okay to set bumpers around what we're going to do in this one. And by the way, set some agreements on how that conversation is going to happen, that we're not going to attack each other, that we're not going to focus on calling each other out, that we actually are going to get really deeply inquisitive. By the way, that was one of my favorite comments, from that Oprah and Ava DuVernay conversation that happened at the end of 13th. Oprah asked her, when you see it, you'll see that the conversations that Ava was able to capture with a diversity of people were mind-blowingly fantastic. And Oprah said, like, how'd you do that? How'd you get them to say these things? And she said, I was genuinely curious. She said, I was just genuinely curious. She said, I really wanted to know what they thought. And they shared with me their truest thoughts. So be genuinely curious. Practice that as a way of being. I'm also going to ask that you have compassion for the people who have less skill and maybe have had less perspective than you. All right, if when you're dancing with someone, you've got to meet them where they are. If you're a fantastic dancer, if you're great at arguing things, if you come in at your note, but don't adjust to the person that you're with, they're going to feel stepped upon and they will leave feeling hurt and you will have lost them. So, you have to adjust to the person that you're with and play at the edge of their capability, which may or may not be where yours is. The last thing I would tell you is just remember that this is a long dance that we are in. For many of us, these big systemic conversations that we are engaging in are going to unfold over time. And that we need to think about making change step by step as we go along, rather than thinking that we are going to find simple solutions, because simple solutions will probably be just updating a lot of these old systems to our new situation. And that would be a great loss. What we really, really want to do is to be able to connect the diversity of conversation for any issue, the diversity of perspectives and opinions, and use that to catalyze and ignite some new things we've collectively never imagined. I think that's the opportunity in front of us. So I hope that you'll be able to use some of these approaches to do that. So what I'd like to do now is actually turn to answering some of the questions that you've got. So if you've got a question, either about a conversation that you were just in, that you were thinking about, or something that has come up from you as I've been sharing these ideas, please go ahead and put those into the chat. I will begin with some of the questions that you sent in earlier, and we can begin with those. So there was quite a number of conversations about, or questions about, how to ignite a conversation within a corporate culture that felt either passive or maybe not that secure. And here's what I would say to you is there's a couple of strategies for doing this. One is figure out what that either the person or the culture seems to care about. Again, you can use this framework in a larger perspective. So what's going on? What's important in the company right now? You know, is it pivoting to be more relevant and you know, successful, profitable, to stay in business? Is it answering some of these bigger questions that are getting asked and answered? How can you connect what you care about to what the company cares about? And how can you position the conversation less about being about your perspective and more about helping the organization to move forward in a productive way? And then test how you can do this, right? The other thing I would do is go and find other people that are what I call imaginal selves. They're people that are like you, that might have similar perspectives, that could join you in the conversation. So sort of find people that can join you and actually problem solve that and make that the first question. How can we engage this culture in the conversation we want to have? And have that place be the place that you begin. And then meet the culture where it is, but push the edge every time you meet it. So I hope that helps. Let's see. How do you suggest using our presence to make it safe in a virtual environment? Oh, yeah, you know what? Your presence will be felt as much in a virtual environment as it will be in a regular environment if you care for it properly. So one thing I'm going to tell you is make sure that you're using your screen well, right? That get your face lit so people can actually see you. Get yourself on the screen so that we can actually see all of your presence. Be on the screen so that we can read you. One of the other things, I heard something recently, I think it was on an NPR interview that I thought was really helpful. That one of the things that person shared, I can't remember who they were, but they were talking about virtual presence and how to build trust. And one of the things that they said that was missing when we were virtual is that people couldn't do the usual little observations that they do of you on the side to judge who you are. And one of the things they suggested was that you actually shared the rationale for what you were putting forward, why you were making the decisions that you're making, why you thought something was important. So actually sharing in a more open way who you are and how you see things and what your intention is. And that helped people to be more trustworthy, particularly, by the way, if someone was newer to them and they didn't have that context already. So, but be present, don't be distracted, you know, give your attention to people. Again, respond to the nuance. Sometimes when I'm online and I'm working with someone, I'll say, that looked like a question that just went across your face. Is there something you wanted to ask me? And I just do it in an open way. Like they're like, no, someone just walked into the room. I'm like, okay, cool. Or sometimes it's, yeah, here's what I'm thinking. So hopefully that will help you maybe take your presence to the next level. Do we have any other questions from folks who are online right now? Otherwise, let me look at some of the ones that we haven't covered here. think we've covered the one about psychological safety. Someone was talking about how to challenge someone without demotivating them. Hopefully we got some ideas on that. I think the challenge is not to think, as soon as you challenge somebody, unless you're doing it in a playful way, like when I challenge a coaching client, I don't come in and say, I think you're wrong. What I say, what I always help them see is it's usually what I'm challenging them to do is to push the limit, their belief in a limit. So let's see if I can give you an example. An example might be someone who believed that being vulnerable was actually a sign of weakness. And I might challenge that assumption by inviting them. I might say, what would be one piece of vulnerability you'd be willing to play with to see how that works for you? And challenge them to push the edge on that belief just a little bit. It might be sharing what they truly believed, or it might be revealing something about themselves that they always kept private. And that's how I challenge people. But I show them how they're going to benefit by pushing the edge that I'm pointing towards, and really just support the heck out of them when they do that. So that's a way of challenging people. Let's see. So it says, what do you suggest for a conversation that's needed with someone senior to you? For example, feedback that they aren't modeling behaviors or the company's principles or values. Yeah, so coaching up is always a little bit tricky. And so here's here's what I suggest. One of the main things that I see people do that causes coaching up to go badly is that they offer their observations from the perspective of how whatever the person, that more senior person is doing is hurting like them personally. And whatever that person is doing, they wouldn't care. If they probably don't care about that, or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. So what you want to do is how, when you offer feedback to somebody, help them see how doing something differently is actually going to benefit them in attaining something that is important to them. And when you can make that connection, people get interested in change. So if your boss is having a hard time getting his or her idea out, or if they're having a hard time getting resources, if you can show them how maybe how they're approaching this might actually be contributing to the limitation they're experiencing, you're probably going to be far more interested in hearing what you have to say. So, and by the way, you might have to do this like planting seeds. So unless you've got a really fantastic relationship with your boss, the chances of them, if you're having a big full out, feedback conversation is probably slimmer, but it might be offering a quick observation or asking a question that evokes some thinking for them on a different route. So think of it like planting seeds and watering them over time, and often that will help people more superior to you kind of value your opinion and ask for more of it. Okay, let's see. How to build trust in that initial conversation. So think for a moment. So thank you, Robin. Yeah. Think for a moment, who do you trust? Like what are the qualities that you look for before you divulge your trust to somebody? I know for me personally, I want to see that they are in integrity with themselves, okay? That what they say and what they do, they seem to line up, so I can trust them, all right? If you're saying one thing and doing something different, my level of trust in you is not so high. I also trust people more when they get genuinely curious about me. If someone actually is asking me and really reflecting back to me that they get who I am far more likely to trust them and be open with them than someone who's all about themselves. All right, so if you go in with your agenda instead of getting curious about theirs, probably trust will be lower. So I always say, think about who you would trust and how can you really inhabit and emulate those characteristics. Let's see. I'm working with leaders who want to start changing our culture of holding people more accountable. I told them we can't hold people accountable until, as leadership team, we have clarity, alignment, and have set expectations. How do you help them realize this without giving away what people have confided in confidence? Interesting. Lots of layers to that conversation. We could probably talk about that one for about 40 minutes. I think I would begin the conversation when I talk with leaders about culture. One of the first things I say is, you are the culture. You can say anything you want about culture, but if that's not who you are, no one's going to believe it. Let's face it. You could, you know. So I think that your point that how they show up is important. And you might even have a conversation with them about, you know, who they would change for, like the kind of conversation I just had with you. You know, what would inspire them to change a culture? Well, it's probably going to be, they would probably share with you characteristics, the same things that you're trying to get them to do. So you might want to have that conversation with them. What would they need to trust somebody enough to change? And then turn it back. How can they be that? And begin there. Again, build connections. Begin there, and then you can start to move into the deeper conversations after that. I hope that helps. Let's see. Okay. Love the dance analogy. It tends to imply a one-on-one bias for edgy conversations. Is there a good way to have edgy conversations in group settings? If yes, what parameters do you put around this? Yeah, absolutely. I chose the one-on-one because that's a good place to begin to learn. And yes, we're going to have edgy conversations in group settings. I would say that pretty much everything I just shared with you would hold in a group. That in the beginning, we want to get really curious about what's important to people. I would really say that one of the first things you want to do is set those boundaries or parameters around how you're going to have the conversation. So what's in and what's out. It's like, you know, are we just exploring today, or are we actually trying, like, what is our conversation about today? Are we just learning from each other? Are we trying to figure out a next step? It's like you've got to set some framework around it so that the conversation just doesn't ping in a million ways. And you've got to say what's in and what's out, what you can and cannot do. You know, it's not fair to attack somebody's idea. We can ask questions about it. We can share something different. We can agree to a next step. And you've got to call it. You've got to, by the way, make it the responsibility of the group to call it. I would always, when I would make rules of the road, I would say it is our shared responsibility to hold ourselves to it. So I'm not going to be the policeman. We are all going to be the police people. We're going to police our conversation for our shared good. So those, I think, training people, building the people's skills to have the conversation is really important. It's really hard to have these kinds of conversations with people who have very low skill level in two areas. One, in their emotional intelligence and their ability to read their own emotions and those of other people. And secondly, in their ability to express ideas. So if you find these conversations aren't going well, step back, ask what skills are missing, and go and build those skills. That, like those kind of what for us at Cylient, we would say in the moment coaching skills are the skills that facilitate these kinds of conversations. So if you are missing skills, step back and build them so that you can have these edgy conversations. Let's see. How about we take one last one here? About connecting, this is wrong. About connecting with my people, I discovered that tapping my vagus nerve under the collarbone activates rational circuits of the brain. Okay, so this is a suggestion, which I've heard of before. I haven't practiced it. Yeah, but we want to try these things. I mean, try things out. So the tapping the vagus nerve is a cool, I personally don't do it, so I can't speak to it. But I would say part of our exploration is also building our skills you know, the more skilled we are individually, the more we inspire other people to build their skills. It's like, oh, that's so cool. I love how you do that. And then help them build the skills to do it. So we got content and we got skills. We are brimming in content these days. We're really lacking in skills. So I hope that some of what I've shared today will maybe inspire you both to build your own skills, your own muscles in some of these areas so that you can be an even more beautiful dance partner for others. I hope that it's inspired you to go out and find some new people to dance with and maybe help them to build their dancing skills so that they can dance with you. So much is at stake right now, ladies and gentlemen, so much. Whether you are, you know, just looking to change your own world personally and care for the people around you and push the edge on some old assumptions and beliefs, whether you want to change the culture of your company, whether you want to change the world. The skills that we're talking about now are the skills that you're going to need to do this in a way that is easier and more impactful. So please practice, please step out, and whatever difference resonates for you to make, please step out and make it. The world needs more conversation right now. We need to do it differently. The door is open for significant change. We can walk through it together. We don't need everyone to walk through it at the same time, but we do need a tipping point. And so I hope that you will think about what matters most to you. And I hope that these skills will help you further that in the world. And if we can be helpful to you, please feel free to reach out to us at Cylient, because this is our goal, really, is to engage the world in some real meaningful conversations. So thank you for being here today. I'm grateful, and I hope you'll join us for additional dialogues as they come along. Take care. Bye for now.